Hello and welcome to the Chop Shop. My name is Dion Tucker. In this episode of the Black Trombone Chronicles, I speak to Dr. Martin McCain. Martin is the Professor of Trombone at Texas State University. He's also an entrepreneur. He's one half of the McCain Duo, and he's a hell of a barbecue pit master. Let's check out what he has to say. How you doing, Martin?
Man, I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me. How's everything going with you?
I feel great today. I feel great. You know, it's we're recording this. It's January 15th. It's Martin Luther King's birthday. I still have a dream. We're all still dreaming, but
yes.
You know, I think this is going to be a great time to talk about some of your dreams that you had and how they manifested themselves and how we're sitting here today, you know, in front of one another. So, man, we're going to talk about a bunch of stuff. I want to ask you about your teaching. I want to ask you about your barbecue. I want to ask you about the McCain Duo. I want to ask you about all that. So,
all right.
So if you could, let's jump into it a little bit. Could you tell us a little bit about where you grew up, how you got into music, and what made you pick the trombone?
Yeah. So I was born in Chicago, Illinois, but grew up in Memphis, Tennessee, you know, just like a lot of black families. You know, my family went through that great migration, like, you know, started in the Mississippi. A lot of them are still there, but then a lot of my family went up to Chicago. And so I was born there. And then my dad is a pastor. So we moved, you know, he took a church in Indiana. That's actually where I started music. And then we moved to Memphis, so I consider Memphis home. My family's here and whatnot. And I actually come from a musical family. Like the generation skipped over my parents, but they were raised by musicians. So like my dad, like his mom was a church organist, and she taught piano lessons. Never knew her because she passed away when my dad was a senior in high school. On my mom's side of the family, which I know a lot of about my mom's side of the family, her dad, my grandfather, was a classical like concert organist, and like he was the face of like organ brochures back in the day, especially when I was, you know, not that popular for a black man to be the face of organ brochures.
Sure.
And so, yeah, he was, you know, my greatest musical influence because I grew up seeing him practice and tour like all the time, you know, playing classical music. His mother was a singer, and she was a part of a, I think the quartet, it was an all-female black quartet called the Silvertones, I believe, and they were like the first female black quartet to be broadcast on Chicago radio. Oh, wow. And to go even further, I just found this history about my family a few years ago. My grandmother's side of the family, Summers, which is, you know, from Jackson, Mississippi. Her uncle was the owner of the Summers Hotel, and there was also like a juke joint connected to this hotel. And it was one of the first black hotels in Jackson, Mississippi. And they would host all these black musicians. So, you know, back, you know, during the civil rights movement, segregation, I mean, we couldn't stay in all the other hotels, you know?
Right.
And so like they were housing like all the musicians, they were letting them play. And so, you know, like back then they called it the chitlin circuit. So yeah, like they were, you know, housing all those musicians. And there was a documentary based on this hotel called Last of the Mississippi Juke Joints. Like the hotel's not there anymore, but there's like like a historical marker, and I haven't seen it yet. And so like I have to get down to Jackson sometime and check that out. Wow. But yeah, man, like I was, you know, just really excited about that part of my history.
Wow. Did that kind of influence you, like seeing it? Was it like, okay, this is something I want to do? Or like, how did you wind up getting into, you know, playing the trombone? Was it school, or was it also home that said, you know what, I want to play some music?
Well, actually, before even band class, when you're picking your instruments, like I started piano lessons. And so, like, the nice thing about my parents being raised by musicians, they just wanted me and my sister just to be involved in things, like extracurricular things. So it wasn't even just, like piano lessons. I was involved with, soccer, sports like golf and stuff like that. I actually started playing golf before I even picked up an instrument.
Oh, wow.
But yeah, started out with piano lessons, which was great because that was like a major foundation for me before, even the fourth grade, when it's time to, pick up the recorder and general music education class and stuff like that. And when it was time to start band class, I was actually put on baritone. It wasn't trombone. And, I was cool with that. And fast forward, I'm so glad that I actually started on the valves, because that definitely helped me, with freelancing and teaching. But I actually switched to trombone in the 6th grade because there was no one in my band class that was playing trombone. And there was a trombone in the band room, and I'm like looking at this instrument, and there's no other instrument like it with the slide. I was enamored with the slide. I'm like, man, this is cool. So I asked like our music ed teacher, Dr. Beach was his name, Richard Beach. I was like, can I switch to that instrument? And he was like, sure, why not? We should talk to your parents, because, my parents didn't buy a baritone. I use the schools, but, like if you're going to be serious, they're going to have to, end up probably buying you an instrument. Yeah. And so, switched to trombone. And we were still in Indiana at the time. And it was funny because, JJ is from Indianapolis, and that's where we were living. I remember being at a bus stop. And like this old man like stopped at the bus stop. I was by myself, and he's like, "Hey, that's a trombone." I was like, "Yes, sir." And he said, "You know about J.J. Johnson?" I was like, "No, sir." And like he said very sternly, he's like, "You need to know who that is." And he drove off. I'm like, okay. So I remember like got home like later that day and asked my dad. I was like, "Who's J.J. Johnson?" And man, my dad just has all these records, like jazz records, because he's like really into music. And I remember the first JJ album he gave me was the Eminent JJ, like volume 2, like on vinyl. And so, yeah, that's how I really started getting hooked on the JJ, to be honest with you.
Wow.
And then we, moved to Memphis, and that's when I started to really, really get into music, like with the band classes and whatnot. And being a part of like youth symphonies.
Was there a lot of other African American students when you were coming up in band, or were you one of the few?
In my elementary school, when I started off, there was a few of us, like a handful. But by the time I got into like middle school, golly, I feel like there was 2 of us. And then when I got to high school, it was about the same. The high school I went to. So even though like I grew up in Memphis, Tennessee, we're right on the state line of Mississippi. And so like my mom is a teacher. So she taught like in DeSoto County, South Haven, Mississippi, which is North Mississippi, suburb of Memphis. And so actually I went to school down there. And so like the racial makeup of my junior high and high school was completely different from what it is now. Now it's like majority black. But back then, like there was a handful of us, man. So, a little different.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. How about the teacher? Was the teacher black, or were they white?
All of my band directors were white, but I will say this. I was a part of the Memphis Youth Symphony all 4 years of high school, which really changed my life. And I always credit, like that was like my real true foundation when I knew I wanted to do music for a living. My orchestra director was black, Vincent Danner, and he was a huge mentor to me and really hit me to a lot of things. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I always think about that, the early thing when we start playing, we're just like kids, excited about moving things around and pushing buttons and stuff. But, we don't really think about like the person that's standing up there telling us this is good or this is bad, because that's really the only gauge we have, unless we have people at home that play our specific instruments that can say, no, do this or that. So our view of somebody, of getting acceptance, and that it's important to kind of know where that started, because it plays a role, as we start to develop, for sure. Because I know people's confidence have been shot, from what their teachers told them. And it's like, no, man, you sound good. And it's sometimes just like seeing it from someone, it's like, really, you think so? It's like, yeah, you sound fine. So all of that plays such a key role. That's why I always like to ask people about their foundation, and how that plays a role. As you started to move into like higher education, like when you got to high school and stuff, and you were a little more serious going into college, what type of things shaped where it was you wanted to pursue your higher education? Like, was it certain schools? Was it certain teachers you wanted to study with? What shaped that for you?
Yeah, absolutely. And I still have to go back to Vincent Danner, who was my youth symphony director. He was associate conductor of the Memphis Symphony. And I feel like it's all about opportunity and people like telling you like, oh, you should look into doing this music festival. So, I mean, I was fortunate because of him. Like he would tell me you should, take this audition for Interlochen. So like, I was very fortunate to do Interlochen and Brevard in high school and being around serious cats like my age. And even really just like the way I got into youth symphony, like one thing I can say, my parents always made sure I had a private lesson teacher. And so from the very beginning, I've always had a private lesson teacher. So I was blessed with that. But the reason how I got in the youth symphony in the first place wasn't because of my private lesson teacher. It was actually because of a conversation my dad was having with the principal clarinetist of the Memphis Symphony, who happened to be Black. And he said, like, oh, your son doesn't know about the Memphis Youth Symphony? Like, he should try out for that. So you see that connection and like that resource. So with Mr. Danner, I'm going up in the ranks and, all state and all that stuff. And he sees that I'm serious. And, he said, you should really like look into like auditioning for conservatories. He did his undergrad. He was a tuba player too. So, Black conductor, he was low brass guy. So, I mean, he knew his stuff. And, he did his undergrad at Oberlin. He did his master's at Michigan. And, he was like, you should really look in auditioning for these schools. So I did, and it was great to also have like that letter of recommendation too. I was going to have a strong recommendation, especially for somebody who looks like me, Yeah. And just him just being in front of his baton every week and him always saying, you guys are professionals, you're professionals. And I mean, he's the reason that, I love traveling abroad, like we would go on tours to Italy and Austria and all this stuff. Like he just opened my eyes to so many things, as a teenager. And so that was huge when it came to like when I was, auditioning for schools. And I went to the University of Southern Mississippi for undergrad. And that wasn't necessarily on, his recommendation. I did a all region band there, like all 4 years of high school. And I had a major rapport with my undergraduate trombone professor, who was a female, and then one thing I can tell you that I've been extremely blessed with all of my primary teachers. I've had the whole gambit, the guy who I studied with junior high through my senior year of high school was white male. My undergraduate trombone professor was a female, Dr. Marta Hoffaker. She was the first female to get a doctorate in trombone performance. And then my graduate school professor was a Black male, Dr. Nathaniel Brickens from the University of Texas. So I've had a very unique experience, And, with Dr. Hoffaker, we just had a good rapport, I talked to her every year and, she recruited me hard. A lot of my, all state friends were going to USM and, like the ensembles were killing. So that was like the major reason why I went there. It was far enough from Memphis where, I could just do what I want. But then if I wanted to drive home on the weekend, like a 5-hour difference, that was cool. I could do that too.
Yeah. Yeah. That was like the opposite of me. I grew up in Miami, Florida. And same thing. I was lucky. I went to performing arts high school. That was a big blessing because it wasn't like a high school. It was more like college. We were on a college campus in downtown Miami. We didn't have bells and stuff like that. There was only 400 students in the whole program. So everybody that was there was extremely talented, but with just the way we navigated high school was very different. But as soon as I graduated in June, I was in New York in July. Like, wow, straight away. July 13th, I was in New York City. I was like 17 years old. I was like, all right, here we go. This is not exactly what I expected, but here it is, you know.
Yeah.
And I really thank my mom in having the confidence to let me try all of these different things. You know, I was the kid in the senior citizen symphony, you know, like sitting
Yeah.
in there. So that was me. She let me do a little bit of everything. So when I came to New York, it wasn't like overwhelming and shock for me. And I was able to navigate my way as a man, you know, not just as a musician, you know. So
Yep.
I think like a lot of what you're talking about, there was other elements of, you know, growing and learning how to be a man from these people that influenced you, you know, all the way across your teachers. That's tremendous diversity. I've never met anybody that studied with a female and African American and a white man. Like that really doesn't happen too often. So
Right.
I think that probably shaped why you're such a well-rounded cat, you know?
Yeah. I try to be, you know.
Yeah, you definitely are. Definitely are. So when you were a student, what was in college, I'm talking now, what was that experience like as far as the trombone studio? And like, I know that your teachers were diverse, but were your other peers, were there many other African Americans in the trombone studio, or were you one of the few?
At USM, I was never the only one. So like, but there were, you know, if the studio was between 18 to 20, I mean, probably at the most there were three of us. And but yeah, I mean, like the vibe there was great, you know. And you know, we always say, especially at USM, I mean, it's a predominantly white school, but I mean, there was just a lot of black students at USM though. And I was very involved in a lot of other things, you know, like, you know, fraternities and student government association. You know, I was kind of like the odd music major, because I like doing stuff outside of the building too. You know what I mean? But yeah, no, the vibe in the trombone studio was great. I mean, one, I was primarily a tenor player in high school, and I had just switched to bass my freshman year. So I was already kind of focusing and dialing in on that, you know. Like I kind of walked in like the top in my freshman class, and then, you know, switched to bass, and I'm like at the bottom of the totem pole trying to, you know, figure out this beast of an instrument, you know.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I was just working, man, you know, just trying to get better, you know.
Yeah. What made you switch to bass trombone?
Well, when my teacher was always thinking about her recruiting classes, like she always liked to try to bring in like a freshman quartet, so 3 tenors and a bass. And the cat that was going to be in my freshman class, the bass trombone player, he actually had a really bad car accident the summer before. So he didn't, and luckily, you know, he survived and everything, but he didn't come to school. And so there was 3 of us, and she mentioned that to me like first month of school, and man, I was not interested at all. You know, I was like, you know, I had success in high school as a tenor player, you know, first year All-State. I'm like, I'm good. And I remember a good friend of mine who was the teaching assistant in the studio, and he said, man, like you would really make a good bass trombone player, you know, like you kind of have like the right setup. And I remember one of the upperclassmen had a mouthpiece that was the equivalent of a trash can, and I tried to buzz on it. I'm like, man, I can't make a sound on this thing. I don't think so. And so, but I was playing a Bach 42 at the time. And back then, the studio was mainly an Edwards studio. Like everybody was playing the Edwards trombones. And my teacher said, well, if you switch to bass, I'll purchase Edwards bass trombone for the studio, and you can play it. And then I'm like, all right, I'll switch to bass trombone.
Right.
You know, brand new instrument. And man, to be honest with you, that was probably one of the best decisions that, you know, that she made, well, for me, and that I decided to do. Because I just fell in love with the instrument. I was hungry. Like I was that nerd that was in the library just trying to soak up recordings and listen to everything, you know?
Yeah. Our paths sometimes like take us all over the place, you know, but when you find where you're supposed to be, you know where that's where you're supposed to be. That's beautiful that you found that. I'm still scared to even touch a bass trombone. Like,
Oh man, you got the chops. I know you can do it.
I could. I just need to get my head. And actually, now I'm trying to learn more brass instruments. I never really thought about it before. I never learned the valves before. So I got a flugabone. And so I'm trying to learn the valves with that. And I'm like, no, I want to learn some tuba now. I want to learn some trumpet now. So maybe the bass trombone, but boy, every time I look at it, it's intimidating. It is intimidating. Oh man.
Oh, that's right.
So talk to me a little bit about after you get out of school, were you kind of on a path of becoming an educator? Is that something that you always wanted to do, or was it something that kind of morphed out of the opportunities that you had at the time?
Yeah, definitely morphed. When I was graduating from undergrad, just like anybody who is majoring in performance, I mean, that's what one flaw in a lot of these music schools. The only thing they teach is, oh, you're majoring in performance, you got to go win an orchestra job. And that's about it, or a military job. So that was the track I was on, and so like I knew I was going to go get a master's, and there was a thought about a doctorate, I'm just trying to dream big, like, oh, maybe, but, not really. And so by the time I went to University of Texas, that was still like the track, I was taking auditions and whatnot. And in Texas, like, it's a completely different beast out there, because private lessons is a culture. I mean, you can make a living just teaching private lessons. And so, I mean, I have students who are teaching like 60 students, making a pretty good living. And when, freelancing was still happening, like they were freelancing at night, but teaching during the day. And so like that was paying my bills, and I enjoyed that. I think about me, I love helping people, and I love music. And so, what better combination is teaching, right? Yeah. And so after my first year of my master's, that's when I was thinking, like maybe sticking around here and like getting a doctorate would be a good idea. And at the University of Texas, if you stayed after your master's and got a doctorate degree, the class is transferred over. So like you can finish very quickly. Yeah. And so, that's when I decided to do that. And be honest with you, like things started to go really quickly for me, because the first semester I started my doctorate degree was the first semester I was teaching full time, like university teaching. Okay. Like I started teaching at Houston Tillotson University, which is a HBCU, also in Austin, and which was like a great first gig for me. Like really enjoyed that.
Yeah, I can imagine looking out at all those faces and like, here is the way. That's a beautiful thing. So as you moved, you've taught at other universities. You're at Texas State University right now, and am I correct that you are the youngest professor on the faculty? Is that correct?
I'm the youngest full professor
on the faculty, which is no small feat at all.
Yeah, highest and you can get.
Yeah, that's incredible. And as a African-American professor, now how big is your trombone studio? Do you have a relatively big trombone studio there?
Yeah, it's been fluctuating this semester. This year we had 30. Like last semester we had 30. Several of them are student teaching this semester, so like they're starting that next Tuesday. And also, but I don't teach all 30. Luckily we were able to hire a good friend, Ron Wilkins, who was also a guest on the show. That's great. Ron's also one of our alums. He received his master's there. And so like it's great for the students because they have a rare opportunity where they have two Black trombone professors. You don't really see that at too many schools.
Like anywhere. That's nuts. I was wondering though, like, what is it like being that's a very large university. And I would imagine that the majority of the professors there are not African American in all fields. So I wonder what it's like. Have you ever had any experiences where students maybe question or look at you differently because you're the African American professor, and it's something that they might not be used to seeing? because you're in the minority in that sense. Have you had to deal with any adversity on that front?
Yeah, with students, not necessarily, because, I established myself when I first came on faculty that I meant business, and, took charge of the studio very quickly. Like, this is the standard, this is what we're going to do. If there was any pushback, probably wasn't necessarily, racial, but just more like couldn't cut it, like this is the standard, you know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah. And, like I said, like, not to mention, you have 3 other universities in the state of Texas where there's Black trombone professors as well. University of Texas, where I went to school, University of North Texas, Texas A&M University in College Station. And so it's, even though we're a very large state, it's kind of different. You know what I mean?
Very
so we have a little bit more representation in Texas. But yeah, with the students, not necessarily, it's like I let the teaching and the playing back it up,
Yeah. Yep.
And so, with them, no, not really. Like, now, when I first came on faculty, a lot of people always just assumed that, because I was Black, this was students, is more of like faculty. Oh, like, you're like the jazz guy. And, I just like let them know very quickly. I'm like, no, I feel I get a lot of jazz gigs in the city, but, majority, like, I do a lot of classical stuff, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so, there's always that, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I know. As you were saying that, I just realized, like, probably until this point, most of my guests have been from Texas or have some kind of Texas background. There's some serious trombone water happening in Texas. It's wow. I just thought about that. Like John Romero, Weston Sprout, like all Ron, like all these guys Tony, are from Texas. Yeah, Tony Baker. Yeah, it's nuts, man. Well, that is good. That you were able to. I think your personality and how you are as a person, and most importantly, your performance will speak for itself. You go in there, and we know that music speaks, and when it's right, it's right. When it's not right, it's not right. And then you have to try and talk your way into it. When it's right, you don't have to say anything. That just is what it is. So I'm glad that the students are able to see that, and that the program is able to benefit from that. As you're working in the professional world, in the freelance world, do you encounter any adversity on different professional situations that you might be in, subtle, or I know a lot of times with us, it's subtle in the music scene. Yep. There might not be any a lot of times, fortunately, but sometimes it's subtle. Do you have any experiences you might like to expand on like that?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely more subtle, but probably one of the most like just blatant racist situations I've ever been in. I was part of an orchestra in Charleston, South Carolina, and mind you, I've lived all through the South. Lived in Tennessee, lived in Mississippi, Arkansas, Texas, but going to Charleston, South Carolina, man, that was like a different situation there. And I guess that stems from the very beginning, where like the slaves were dropped off. But there was a table full of like my Black colleagues. We were playing orchestra, and we went to this restaurant, really great seafood restaurant called Hyman's, and we're just having a great time, and this white gentleman had to have been like older than 60, just stepped over and like looked at all of us and literally said, "There's sure a lot of you guys, aren't you?" And one of my friends, his comeback was really good, because like what do you mean, a lot of musicians? And the guy just walked away, But that was I mean, just being in Charleston. But you got to look at the history of Charleston too. I mean, when I forgot that cat Dylan Roof, shot up like all the people in the church. It's like I've been to that church before. I mean, that was just crazy. And so like, just being there, man, I'm like, whoa, like this is like really a thing. But on the subtle tip, you see that stuff all the time. You know what I mean? like I sub a lot, especially in the orchestra realm. And one thing that I make sure that I do, when you're like walking backstage and the security guard, I always make sure to let them know, like, look, I'm Martin McCain. You're going to be seeing me for the next 4 days, And I have to do that even with black security guards too, because even sometimes they're conditioned, like, oh, like, you don't look like you're supposed to be here. You know what I mean? Even though I have a trombone on my back.
You're speaking it now, man. That's like a subtle tip. And I guess that's like, a Green Book Pro musician tip. When you walk into a hall that you might not be known in, introduce yourself to the security people. Hey, how you doing? Good to see you. Like, look them in the eye so that the next time you walk through the door, it's not like, who are you or whatever. It's terrible that we have to even think about that, but pro hack, for people like us, do that, because not only does it give you like a personal, I've actually met some really amazing people like that, going on tour and just talking to the door people. Those are some of the people that have the best stories. They've been working at some of these theaters that's like history right there, but sometimes it's a safety measure more than anything else, like, hey, I'm cool. I'm supposed to be here. And we shouldn't have to do that, but we do, so, we navigate.
Sorry. Yeah, we would have white colleagues that wouldn't have to do that, just walk right by, not even have to say their name. But, it's just like
they wouldn't even think about doing that.
Right.
That's the deep thing about it. So I want to talk to you a little bit about your entrepreneurship. That's something that I'm actually really like excited, because I'm just stepping into that realm myself of I've always wanted to have my own studio, quote unquote. I didn't realize, I've always loved teaching. I didn't realize how much I love teaching until I got to Estonia. And the person that worked with me, Jan Kagarice, who used to teach at North Texas University, the way that she coached me back to being able to play better than I've ever played, I was just like, okay, I have to share this feeling with people. It was really like, at that point, it was like, that's my calling. I knew I should do it. I just didn't know how or why, but I have to, but being an entrepreneur, especially a Black entrepreneur, there's a mental thing that you have to get over first, and it's amazing to see you and your wife doing that, the McCain Duo. I'm going to have some links in the description for those of you that might not know, but you're going to find out. Like, the McCain Duo, it is like some of the most mesmerizing performances I've seen. Like, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about the connection between you and your wife, but tell me a little bit about what propelled you into wanting to be an entrepreneur and as a trombone, just a Black man, but just how you used all your skills, and put it towards that.
Yeah, absolutely. So this all really started when I was an undergrad. So I did a work study with our orchestra office, and the director of orchestral activities at the time, Dr. J. Dean, I believe he's the director of the School of Music at USM now. He was phenomenal when it came to marketing. Like, for our orchestra in South Mississippi, I mean, just like the marketing brochures and like the way he would bring guest artists in, it looked like, professional, top-notch stuff. I mean, my freshman year, he would bring in Yo-Yo Ma. My sophomore year, he brought in Itzhak Perlman. And I remember my junior year, he knew I was a performance major, and he said, if you're going to be a performance major, no one is going to market you better than yourself. And I would highly recommend that you consider taking like some marketing, some business classes, and add this to your degree. And so actually I did that. And so I stayed in undergrad an extra year. So I was there for 5 years, and I tacked on this business / marketing degree. Wow. Not knowing how important that was going to be later on, because it seems now some schools or universities, School of Musics, are trying to get into this oh, we need to start talking about entrepreneurship and whatnot, but
Right.
that was definitely not, the thought in the early 2000s. You know what I mean? And so, man, that was great. And so when I started to use that info when I moved to Texas, started building my own studio. I was like probably one of the few people in the School of Music at the time that had a website, just like little things, like learning how to like network, you know what I mean? And so that's just always been a passion to me because, one, it's important. Like you have to know how to play, but then, there's a lot of cats that just stayed in the practice room that nobody ever heard of, and I'm like, man, that's a shame, and there's no teachers that are telling these students like the other things that you have to do besides, you need to play your scales, you need to play your etudes and all that jazz. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that was passionate to me.
It shows, it definitely shows. And as I was doing my research when I was starting my own business, I looked at everybody's stuff. And, there's a certain things that pop, and just seeing your stuff, like the way it was put together, it popped. And it really made me say like, wow, like look at these two. And I'm speaking about you and your wife. Look at these two amazing young Black people marketing something that is extremely them. You guys make music together, and it looks and sounds beautiful. Everything looks outside as good as it sounds on the inside. So I want to talk a little bit about that connection. There's never a bad time for a good Black love story. So if you could, man, tell me a little bit about how you guys met, and then, how did you wind up performing together?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, she tells the story way better than I do, but we always say that we met at UT, but not really, because we weren't in school together. So like I graduated in the spring, and then she came in the fall, but I was still in the Austin area. And initially, like we played on a Black composers concert, not together, but I remember seeing her backstage. I had a group that played, had some students that played, and it was just more of like, after concert, became Facebook friends, and then that was really about it. And then a year later, like a year and a half later, I was living in Arkansas at the time, getting ready to move back to Texas to take my current job, and reached out to her by recommendation of a mutual friend, and she was working at Houston Tilton at the time. So we were just going to chop it up and talk about our the similarities of the position that we had, and man, it just turned into going out to one date, and then another date, and then fast forward a year later, then we got married.
Nice.
And so really that's kind of how the McCain Duo started, because, we got married, but I was, getting invited to do these different, engagements at universities, and, she was of course coming with me too. It just made sense instead of me playing with the piano somewhere else. So we weren't billed as the McCain Duo then. And then we thought, like we really do have something special here, because, one, husband and wife, two, bass, trombone, and piano. You're not really seeing that. And a lot of the similarities that we love, like one, the type of music that we play. I mean, we're both classically trained, but we both, grew up, in church. We both love gospel music. We love jazz music. Let's get composers to write music. That's music that we love, and marry them together. And then, she was really big into like the entrepreneurship stuff too. And it just kind of started going from there,
Okay. Man, it's incredible, because my wife, she played clarinet in like high school, and one Christmas I bought her a clarinet, and I was like, we're doing some duets, Christmas duets, whatever it is. Yeah. So every now and then she'll whip it out and tease me with like a little, because she's actually like a natural, she's a natural, and it makes me sick, because she could just like lay in the bed and like do it. And I'm like, that's too good to just be like doing it like that. But she has her doctorate in education, and she does a lot of things like on that side. So when it comes to my business, she's heavily involved with, how everything functions, making sure all the I's and T's are dotted. A lot of things that I just don't know and look at as a musician, she sees it and she's like, no, it's got to be like this. So the working together is something that like I'm getting better at, and I
right.
like being a husband and wife, it's like you're a husband. It's like you still didn't take out the trash. There's that, and then there's work. Like it's too. And sometimes you don't want to marry these two worlds to mesh together, but
exactly
it happens. It happens. But when you guys are on stage performing together, I watched the YouTube video. I think it was Gershwin's Prelude number 2. A YouTube video up. And one thing that I noticed, like, I haven't seen like 1,000 recitals with a company. I've seen hundreds, but I haven't seen 1,000. So maybe I'm not the most, learned person on this, but I know a musical connection when I see it. When you guys play together, I know that you don't really ever have to look at each other.
Right.
Like when, normally, because you don't have the time to practice with the account, but there is a conductor between you two, the unspoken conductor. And it was amazing to me to watch her lead you lead her. Sometimes she was always right with you, know, and vice versa. And I wonder, like, how is it that you guys have that connection in, like, how it seems like that's life for you. You guys know how to work life. Like, how do you bring that to the stage? Or is it just there and you don't have to talk about it?
Man, well, I mean, it's at the point now, like August will be our 10th anniversary. So yeah, we've been playing together going 10 years. So it's just like, you're playing with any section. I have, some cats that I play with, and when we're on a get together, we know like, we don't have to think about anything because we know like who's going to breathe where, we know what's going to happen. And so it's like the same situation, but there's nothing like when you're playing with your spouse, though. It's just an even deeper connection. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so, it's amazing. I mean, she is an amazing like pianist in her own right. Like has a lot of things going on right now. But so because a lot of people always say like, man, you're so lucky you have your own in-house accompanist. I'm like, man, I have to be on her schedule, because she's she tours with her own groups. She's like a soloist, and but it's just when we get that chance to play together, it's like we don't have to think about things too much. It's just let's do it.
That's such a unique thing, and anybody that hasn't watched it, like, just click the links in the description and find it. Like, do yourself that favor. And also that series you guys have too, that Elevate series. I don't know if you're still doing that, but man, keep on that, because that was great seeing you guys on camera together. That really good connection. Yeah.
The spring Elevate series should be out in a few weeks. So
okay,
look out for that.
All right. Yeah, please check that out. Those of you that haven't seen it yet, definitely check that out. I wanted to ask you a little bit about these trombone festivals. I'm not. It's just if it's the ITF or the ITA. Are you a part of both of them, or no? Is it ITF or is it ITA? Like, do you work with both of those festivals?
I don't work with both. So the ITF is under the umbrella of the ITA. Okay. And I've been active in the ITA for several years, and I guess it's one of those things. I was active, been active because my teachers were active. Like my undergraduate trombone professor, she was the secretary for many years. My graduate school trombone professor, he was the president. During the time that I was, I started to study with them, and so I just thought, okay, like they always said, this helps them help their students, and I found like it's helped me as far as the resources to help my students. But ITF has kind of become its like own thing, though, even though it's under the umbrella.
Okay, all right, thank you for clearing that up for me. And so whenever I see in general a flyer, when we were talking about flyers and marketing and stuff like that, whenever I see that for trombone festivals, I see mostly white males You occasionally see a female, and then every now and then you'll see a black male. Every now and then you rarely ever see a black female. I don't know if I've ever seen a black female on one of these flyers.
Never.
Now that I think about it. So what do you think? And this is, of course, this is just your opinion, but what do you think it would take in order for there to be more representation of people of color in these organizations? Do you think it's the organization being more open to that? Or do you think it's the players being more active and, trying to step up and say, hey, I would like to do that? From your perspective, how do you see that?
Man, I'm glad you asked me that question because, when I, have conversations with other Black trombone players, we have these conversations all the time. It was like, man, you see that flyer, you see that website? Because definitely, nothing's changed. Seems like people are trying to do a little bit better ever since, this summer with the murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. Like, people start to wake up like, oh, Black people exist. We've been here. So some people, wanted to have some lip service and, put a black square on June 2nd and just to kind of save face and say they're doing something. But one thing, I'm just not afraid to call things out anymore. I feel like it was a point, when we're coming up and we're conditioned, maybe you shouldn't say something because you're not going to be advanced in your career. Right. And I have no hesitation calling people out for what it is. There was one particular festival that wasn't held in this country. It was online. It was like a competition. Man, the whole flyer looked like a Trump cabinet. I'm like, what is this? And we called him out like quickly, and barely a month later, then I think they added like one or two people. I think it was just one, to be honest with you, and some females too. And the thing is, it just needs to be called out, that's the first thing. From the female point of view, I feel like Abby Conant did a really good job of doing that in 2013. I believe it was 2013 or 2015, like when the Trombone Festival was in France, and there was like not one female on there. Like, she was very outspoken, and I think that was great. I feel like, we need to be more outspoken about these festivals, and people who feel like they have the position to do that. It's like, I'm at the point now, like, I don't, care about furthering my career and nothing like that. Thinking about these young cats, in the future, and like these young cats who are killing it, need to have the opportunity and see that representation. You know what I mean? But it all starts also with the boards too. You have to look at some of these boards, like some of these board of advisors, the board of directors are not diverse whatsoever. Like, there's still like that tokenism that's in there, and so like that needs to change. And there still needs to be more conversation. I mean, it seems like the ITAs, they came up with a diversity committee as of recently. I'm not sure, exactly what's, happened with that yet. But and at the festival in 2019, which was in Ball State, there was like a diversity panel. So it seems like conversations are starting to happen. But I think that just needs to happen more on a global spectrum. You know what I mean? But you just have to look at, just look at the optics here. If you're flyer, if you're a guest artist, if it looks like a Trump cabinet, you need to reevaluate what you're doing. Like, you're doing something wrong, and that's one thing that we try to take pride in, at least at Texas State. Like, when we're bringing guest artists in, like, it's not going to be all white males, even though the students are studying with 2 Black trombone professors. Last semester we brought in 11 guest artists. We brought in like several blacks, several females, like bring in several Hispanics, because we have several Hispanic students in our studio. And so like, we want them to realize, there's the representation's there, and we're here.
Yeah,
Sorry,
yeah.
I can go on a soapbox, man, because I just feel very
Hey,
passionate about that.
man, listen, you're speaking the right thing because, man, once again, I do my homework, before I jump into anything, even if I'm passionate about it. I want to know as much as I can. And I'm looking through the internet, and especially during this COVID time, you got plenty of time to scroll through. And I'm just looking YouTube videos, trombone teacher. When I Google trombone teacher, what comes up? I don't see anybody like me,
Mm-hmm.
like
Mm-hmm.
anybody. And it's people think that's a little deal, but if you Google search trombone player, me or you are not going to come up,
Exactly.
you know? And
Yep.
there are so many amazing African American trombonists outside of jazz. Yes, we
Yep.
know about our jazz players, and
Mm-hmm.
yes, have our representation there. But in the classical world, there's so many, and really Weston Sprott is, somebody that brought a lot of us together with the Black Excellence
Yes.
Trombone Choir.
Mm-hmm.
And it was eye-opening for me because I've never seen it like that on my screen. And that's a
Exactly.
big part of why I started this series, because that visualization was eye-opening to me. I said, there is
Mm-hmm.
no way I'm going to step away from this and not connect with all of these brothers and all of these stories that are here, because that's kind of what's missing right now. The other stuff it's not going anywhere. It's going to be there.
Right.
It
Exactly.
will be there. Now that we have this opportunity and people are listening, I think it's really important to tell our stories. Hence why I started this series. It's turned into something more and deeper than I ever thought it was. First it was like,
Yeah.
oh, let's talk about where we came from. But these type of conversations are important because that's the only way things are going to change moving into the future. And there are some bad young brothers coming up on classical
Yes.
trombone. Like
Exactly. Yep.
seriously bad, and they need to be in the position to know and hear things like this and understand what you're getting into. It's only going to help you in the future. Speaking of that, what advice would you give to a young African American trombonist in the field of classical, or just in the field of music, but especially in the classical field, how to navigate their way through this time where maybe now you have an opportunity that you might not have had before? Like, what type of tips would you give them?
One, I would say, you always got to play your butt off. Like that is the big thing, because when you do get these opportunities, you don't want someone to say, I'm like, oh, well, we know why you were hired here, like
Right.
you need to be killing it, like regardless. Yeah. And I've always been told, like, my parents taught me at a young age, you have to be better. You just have to be better than everybody else. And I've always just kind of had that mentality in everything that I do. Still, to this day, because there's a lot of times where we're like the only people in the room,
Yep.
shoot, for the longest, this is my 11th year on the faculty at my university. And I've been the only one, out of like 80 faculty members, and
Wow.
so
Wow.
like, that's why I'm like, oh, the studio has to be killing, like I have to, take care of business, so like let your work speak for itself. It's really important. Also, I say this on a lot of podcast interviews, mentorship is huge. And with the day and age of Zoom and Facebook, and you can just easily just contact people. People are so accessible. Don't feel like, you have to be afraid to reach out to someone that you look up to. I think I was just hungry back then where I would just email people, like before social media, but now there's no excuse. And so like that person doesn't necessarily have to be your teacher, but like, man, I'm really inspired by this person, like I want to hit them up and just pick their brain, like have that mentor, somebody that inspires you, that, you feel like you can that you trust, that it's gonna like help, take you to the next level. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely had that. I was the same way. This is like before emails. I was getting cats' phone numbers. Like when I was coming, like, Wyclef, can I call you? Like that. I remember the first time I called Wyclef Gordon on the phone. I was like maybe 16 years old, and my hands were sweating. Like I was just like, I'm about to call Wycliffe Gordon, and man, we probably talked for like an hour on the phone.
Yeah.
As a 16-year-old, I couldn't believe it. I could not believe it, and what students should realize is that if you ask 9 times out of 10, you will get the world of information.
Exactly.
Most people are willing to share it with you, especially people like us that have been in unique positions. We're going to give you the keys.
Yep.
What you do with it is on you, but we're going to give it to you because nobody hesitated to give it to me. Nobody, and that paying it forward is so important. It's really important. Before I let you go, though, I wonder if you could pay me forward one thing. And just speaking of inspiration, like you have definitely been an inspiration for me on this front. Your barbecue, bro. When I when I see your pictures, like certain food talks through the screen. Like I want to eat the phone. Like talk to me a little bit about your master barbecue that I haven't tasted, but I already know it tastes good.
Yeah, man. That's definitely my thing outside of music, and especially with COVID going on and like no gigs. I mean, I just been trying to just make it better. I mean, I grew up in like barbecue capitals. I mean, grew up in Memphis. Live in Texas, and so like I know my barbecue, and so like that's my goal is. That's going to be a part of a retirement check one day, like have a food truck or something, man, definitely want to get into competitions.
McCain Barbecue, like you can't lose with that name. It's McCain Barbecue. Yeah, it's great. Like I'm with that. Yeah, have you had that McCain's? Like it's there. It's already there. Oh man, if you could give me one parallel between cooking barbecue and playing bass trombone.
Woo, golly. You know what? It's like a science. There's a sweet science. And in all honesty, I enjoy cooking it more than eating it. And it's just like with trombone, it's like when you're trying to figure out like, this is the type of sound concept I want, listening, studying. That's what I'm doing right now. Like I'm studying like some of the great barbecue pit masters. Melissa Cookston, who is known as like the barbecue queen right now.
Okay.
She's like owns the Memphis Barbecue Company. She's having a class. Like I'm thinking about like being a part of her class and then actually talking with her. And I'm trying to pick the brains of like the great barbecue masters. I really want to get better.
Yeah, man. Yeah, I know it. I can see the sign. I see the love. I see the patience in your food through the picture. I know that wasn't cooked in 2 hours. That was like got up early, put it on, went and did some stuff, came back, checked on it 2-3 times before that was ready.
I know that's right.
I know it, man. Oh man. And Martin, I can't thank you enough, man. This has just been like, it's been great getting to know you, hearing where you're coming from and seeing where you're going. Like, I really can't wait to see what the future has in store. You're doing so many great things with your students, with your McCain Duo, with your family, with you are just doing great things, man. So thank you so much for coming on and spending some time and sharing your experiences with the audience.
Hey, Dion, no, thank you, man. Like, I really appreciate it. I mean, this thing that you have going on, one, I'm already a big fan of the Chop Shop, but like the Black Trombone Chronicles as well. I mean, thank you for giving us a platform to speak. And I mean, I'm glad I just had a conversation with you because like being the curious person, I remember seeing you on TV. Like with Harry Connick back in the day. And I'm like, man, who is his brother? Like, in this band. And so the honor is mine to even just get a chance to like chat with you.
Oh man, it's all mine. It's all mine. And for the people out there that don't know, I'm going to leave some links in the description below so you can check out Martin. Like, check out all of the things that he does. He's really an amazing brother. And I want to thank all of you for watching this episode of the Black Trombone Chronicles. If you haven't done so yet, make sure you subscribe to the Chop Shop YouTube channel. And I'll see you next time at the Chop Shop. Peace.